Good afternoon. When the House rose, the question before the House was that the Drugs Prevention and Misuse Amendment Bill be read a second time. The member for Dennery North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I rise to make a very short contribution to the debate on the Drug Prevention Amendment Bill, I am reminded once again, Mr. Speaker, that my presence in this august chamber and what has given me legitimacy in here to speak is the belief of the people of Dennery North in my ability to champion their cause. And once again, Mr. Speaker, permit me to place on the record how grateful I am to the people of Grand Rivière, Richfond, La Pelle, La Ressource, Despines, Cadet, Belmont, Denny Rivière, and Grand Ravine. Those communities, Mr. Speaker, whenever we approach election, they are grouped as one cluster and ascribed the label Dennery North. And it is on behalf of the people of those communities I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to support the legislative adjustment that decriminalizes the possession of 30 grams of cannabis. Mr. Speaker, in times gone, users of cannabis, in particular members of the Rastafarian community, would have been arrested for having in their possession 30 grams of marijuana. They would have been disrespected. They would have been humiliated. They would have been abused. They would have been violated. They would have been labeled, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, they would have been imprisoned. Yes, spend time in jail for having in their possession 30 grams of cannabis. Mr. Speaker, this St. Lucia Labour Party administration is saying to the people of this country that given the extent to which we have evolved as a nation, we believe it is wrong and it is not in keeping with international standards for any St. Lucian to be incarcerated or to be arrested for having in his or her possession 30 grams of marijuana. Mr. Speaker, we are not just here today to amend the legislation, but as all my colleagues before me would have said in their respective presentations, roughly a week ago, we were here in this house, Mr. Speaker, and we took steps to expunge from the records of individuals who had been caught or arrested for having in their possession 30 grams of marijuana. Today, Mr. Speaker, we are giving a clean bill of health to those individuals as it relates to their criminal record. Mr. Speaker, I believe the amendment that is being proposed here today is a very important first step. And the Prime Minister, whilst presenting the bill, told all of St. Lucia, and quite rightly so, that this proposed amendment signals a bigger intention to comprehensively review our drug use legislation. And we have to do so, Mr. Speaker, in a more holistic way. But today should be a day of redemption. And this amendment should be seen as a small victory for users of marijuana in our society, in particular the Rastafarian community. And it was the member for Castries South, Mr. Speaker, who said that given our historical past and what we inherited from colonialism, it's as if we were preconditioned to carry a particular perception of people who used marijuana. And that, Mr. Speaker, infiltrated our core as a people to look down on individuals who used marijuana. And the Rastafarian community suffered the most. Rasta, Mr. Speaker, they've been discriminated against for too long. And this, Mr. Speaker, piece of legislation is seeking to level the playing field. And let me say here also that it is not only the young men on the block who will benefit from this. Mr. Speaker, there are reputable St. Lucians who occupy the upper echelons of decision-making, be it at the private sector or in the public sector, who are recreational users of marijuana. And they too stand to benefit from the proposed legislation. I want to hasten to add, Mr. Speaker, like the member for Grosile, I do not smoke. I am not a user of marijuana. I have never used marijuana. But, Mr. Speaker, as a lawmaker, I have a moral responsibility to denounce wrong when I see it. I have a moral responsibility to abhor injustice when I see injustice, Mr. Speaker. You go on the supermarket shelves and the different outlets where alcohol is sold, and you have a wide variety from which to choose. And every day, Mr. Speaker, we've been reminded by the health professionals of the adverse effect alcohol consumption can have on our health. And it goes further. Not only is it detrimental to our health, excuse me, but, Mr. Speaker, look at the number of persons who develop complications, placing a greater burden on an already stretched healthcare system. But for us, we don't care. It is business as usual. But the little boy from Belmont, Denier, Olion, Gadet, Larry Suso, Lapel, or Richford, Grand Ravine, who stands by the roadside, Mr. Speaker, with 30 grams of marijuana, we are quick to label him as criminal, and we are quick, Mr. Speaker, to bring down the legal guillotine on him for what at the time was perceived as being a transgression. As the Minister for Education, I want to profit the opportunity through you, Mr. Speaker, to say to the children of this country that they should not experiment with marijuana. They should not try to engage in smoking, be it marijuana or any other substance. The Ministry of Education that I lead, Mr. Speaker, we do not encourage that. In much the same way, we do not encourage and we do not want our students to consume alcohol. Alcohol is something for the adults, and marijuana, as the Prime Minister would have said when presenting the bill, is also something for adults. So I just want to place on the record that in as much as I support the amendment to the legislation, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Education will spend no effort in ensuring that the school children in this country stay away from marijuana, stay away from alcohol, and stay away from drugs altogether, because this is not in their best interest, and it can never be in the best interest of our country. Mr. Speaker, je dis ça créole. Jodi a gouvernement ja venu ici pour changer loi qui était là en les livres nous pour combien d'années. qu'aussi police te joint nous et puis un petit portion marijuana et ganja. De ça à Weto. Et quand temps qui passe, pas seulement de ça à Weto. De ça maintenant l'audience. Ou de ça prend l'argent pour ça. Et après on te prend l'argent. Ça de été en le record pour combien d'années? L'année après l'année après l'année. So that là où aller et comme application devant bureau gouvernement pour jouer un passeport et bien pour jouer un visa et bien n'importe ça vous voulez. Premier bagage yo kamado c'est un police record. Et que là où jouer un police record ça là. En les records ça au cas où t'es tapé arrêté de les 10 l'année qui passait puis yo te chabou et puis un petit portion marijuana. Et ça c'est un tâche en les laver. Et tout le monde qui ici, Mr. Speaker, everybody in St. Lucian society, we have had transgressions of our own. But I believe in giving people a second chance. And there are persons who would have been arrested for not just minor offenses, but serious offenses, who have truly, Mr. Speaker, had what we like to call in the cabinet their Damascus Road experience. And they have changed their lives around, Mr. Speaker. And today, they come across as renewed beings, and I don't want to sound like a preacher, but Mr. Speaker, they have undergone some serious reformation exercises that make them suitable to serve society again. And we are saying that particular posture, that approach ought to be applied to individuals who have been caught with small quantities of marijuana. So, aujourd'hui, Mr. Speaker, si c'est un gros jour pour même communauté Rasta. Nous tous savons qui passe droit. Rasta a joindre hod gouvernement, hod society, hod police, hod même qui en l'autre religion. Et qui ça qui crème you, Mr. Speaker? Because you join you et puis un petit portion marijuana. In much the same way, we respect the rights of people to do whatever that is deemed necessary by their religion, Mr. Speaker, Christians and what have you. I am saying we owe it. We have a moral responsibility to the Rastafarian community to ensure that we give them the liberties to use cannabis for the religious reasons that they have postulated over time. And so, Mr. Speaker, in as much as I do not smoke, I don't foresee myself smoking in the future. And in as much as the Ministry of Education will not encourage and will always continue to enforce the measures that we have in place to keep our children away from marijuana and other drugs, I am saying, Mr. Speaker, it is an injustice to those who want to use small quantities, and that is why this piece of legislation has been brought here today. I believe, as I said the last time we convened as a parliament, that this is a very bold move by the Honorable Prime Minister and the government. This is a progressive move, Mr. Speaker, and this particular move is in keeping with St. Lucia as we continue to stride forward and take our rightful place on the regional and international stage. This, Mr. Speaker, is my very short contribution to the proposed amendment to the legislation.
Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Development and the Youth Economy.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank honorable members for their contributions, Mr. Speaker. I just need to clear just a few brief points before I ask for the House to adopt the amendment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member for Choiseul was inquiring as to why I was the mover of the motion. I can assure him, Mr. Speaker, that in this government, we do things according to plan, and it was thought that since the amendment dealt with a change in a bill, an existing act, it is better for the Minister with responsibility for legal affairs and justice.
But Prime Minister, his query related actually to what was written on the order paper, not to any problem with you presenting it. The order paper did say the Minister for Health.
Okay,
So that was his query.
So you handled it.
I wouldn't say that.
Since I did some work for you. Mr. Speaker, but I just want to tell him that the reason why I dealt with it is because it was a matter of amendment to the law, and then since I'm charged with justice and legal affairs, I thought it was decided that we would do it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member for Beaufort South, in his presentation, gave us a good sense of the history of why we are here today. It's an accurate description of the history. And many bills in this House, like the one that's coming after us, it also has its way down history, down the corridors of history. But the member for Castries, for Beaufort South, is correct. A lot of that work was started when he was Prime Minister, and also his spouse was responsible for quite a bit of work that led us today, Mr. Speaker. And I recall in the 2011 elections, the 2006 elections, Mr. Speaker, because we lost in 2011. We lost in 2006, yeah. In the 2006 election, Mr. Speaker, I remember having that, I remember the leader of the party at the time making that pronouncement about cannabis. And I was speaking at a public meeting in one of my garrisons, Mr. Speaker, that somebody learned to their peril recently. One of my garrisons in Bagatelle, I made the point that we are going to be speaking about decriminalization of the home. That was in 2006. And then I remember my audience, Mr. Speaker, made up of quite a few young people and quite a few Rastafarians, ensured that I was returned and I chased the crazy ballhead. Mr. Speaker, so I think the member for Beaufort South is correct, Mr. Speaker, and I applaud him and his dear spouse for the work they've done. Mr. Speaker, the member for Beaufort South spoke about an amendment to allow us to plant, not us, to allow users of marijuana to plant, Mr. Speaker, you know I'm a farmer, Mr. Speaker? And the member doesn't give me any incentives. To allow users to plant four plants of marijuana, of cannabis. But the thing that is something that is worthwhile, but as we said, that is process. So when we return with the entire cannabis bill, we will include that. And that's so we will not do it today, but we will do it when we return very shortly with a total cannabis bill. We will include that provision to allow people to plant without being arrested or without breaking the law, a suitable number of plants, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member for Schurzell spoke about traffic offenses, Mr. Speaker, and let me assure him that already exists in the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, Section 75. It speaks about driving while intoxicated. And intoxicated in Section 75, 1A, Mr. Speaker, in the Motor Vehicles Road Traffic Act, it speaks of being so impaired from drugs consumed as to be incapable of having proper control of the motor vehicle. So that is already taken care of, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member for Castries South spoke about the public health regulations, and he's right in terms of no smoking in public places. And then again, Mr. Speaker, the public health smoking control regulations speaks to the no smoking in public places. Under Section 3, it speaks about outdoor smoking. So I'm glad that the member reminded members of the public that they should not be smoking in public, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate that this is just a process. A process we've started, and it's keeping with an election promise, our pledge to the people of St. Lucia, in terms of where cannabis is concerned. We said we would decriminalize it. We did so 2 sittings ago. We said we would expunge the records. We did so 2 sittings ago, and today we come in to decriminalize it, Mr. Speaker. But that is a process, and the process will include a holistic view of cannabis, where we'll make provisions for the medicinal use, for cultivation, for export, etc., Mr. Speaker. But we want to assure the public that this bill is to stop the discrimination and the almost harassment of people with 1 joint or less than 40 grams. We know there is more work to be done, and we'll do it, but that is stage 2 of the process, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for people under 18, younger people under 18, we want to tell them that there'll be repercussions if they are found or if they smoke cannabis. And we will ensure that there is enough education, and the social services sector warns people about the use of cannabis if they are below 18, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, we have to face it. This is a reality that we have to deal with. Many people in St. Lucia smoke cannabis. Many people, many people, Mr. Speaker. And then we do not want to keep our legal system clogged with this 1 joint offenses. But it's a process, and it's not a license to smoke up in public, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the member for Grosley, he spoke about to sports people. He said athletes should be careful because part of the regulations for athletes still entails people, if you caught, when your test is done, if marijuana or cannabis is found in your system, then you are caught, you are disbarred, or you're banned. So this is still part of the process. So, Mr. Speaker, I think today is a historic day. And as I said, our brothers and sisters in the Rastafarian movement, this is just the first step to free it up, to liberate them, to stop the harassment, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure them that when the cannabis bill will come in its totality, we will ensure that there is no discrimination against the people who started it and against the small producer, against the small farmer and the small producer. I envisage a cooperative system. I don't want to go into that because, as you know, we pay special attention to cooperatives. This is why we put it in the hands of the Minister of Commerce. So cooperatives can be a business, and I'm sure that planters of marijuana can look at that when the time comes. I don't want to preempt them, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank honorable members. I thank the people who were involved in the Cannabis Commission report. I want to thank them for the work that they did. It was a bipartisan approach. The member for Choiseul was involved. He was the chairman of that commission. I want to thank him for the work he did, Mr. Speaker. But the unfortunate thing, Mr. Speaker, is he's on the wrong side. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the AG and the staff, and I would move that the bill goes through its other stage and members support it, Mr. Speaker. I thank you.
Honourable members, the question is that the Drug Prevention and Misuse Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Drug Prevention and Misuse Act, Cap 3.02.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 8.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Insertion of new Section 8A.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Insertion of new Section 14A.
Clause 5.
Mr. Speaker, can I move for an amendment, Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
Clause 5, treatment and programs for a child or young remove offender of the person. And in 14A, everywhere there is offender, we put person. So that in the first line, a young person, and it will be on the fifth line. The fifth line, a young person.
The proposed amendment is that Section 5, where it says treatment and programs for a child or young offender, the word offender be replaced with the word person. And the same applies to the full Section 14A. Wherever a young offender is, it is changed to young person. Clause 5, as amended, stands part of the bill. Clause 6.
Insertion of new Section 27A.
Clause 6, stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honourable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As of that opinion, say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable members, I beg to report that the Drugs Prevention of Misuse Amendment Bill went through committee stage with amendments to Clause 5. Honourable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Development and the Youth Economy.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honourable members, the question that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Drugs Prevention and Misuse Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Drug Prevention of Misuse Amendment Act 2021.
Minister for Commerce, Manufacturing, Business Development, Cooperatives and Consumer Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to first add words.
Put the, presented for first reading.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present the first bill shortly entitled Consumer Protection Amendment.
Consumer Protection Amendment.
Proceed, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of standing orders number 48 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Members, the question is standing order 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Minister for Commerce to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. As the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed, Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I seek leave to add my words of condolences to Mr. Linford Fevrier on the passing, and his son, on the passing of Mrs. Valerie Albert Fevrier, a lady who was a trailblazer in the media and one who helped several along the way. Mr. Speaker, I also want to express condolences to persons from my constituency. We've had several persons who have passed as a result of COVID. And I know it's always a difficult challenge to lose a loved one. I'll not call individual family members, Mr. Speaker, because I've spoken with them. But I want to take this moment again to thank the frontline workers, our doctors, nurses, the firemen, for the tremendous work that they're doing. Mr. Speaker, I've said in the past, and I'm going to say it again, the COVID has changed everything. And this weekend, I know I had to intervene on several occasions for persons who were stuck at the airport in Barbados. I had to be calling the CMO, and I want to take this moment to thank her for assisting those persons access to come back to St. Lucia. I also want to thank Dr. Eugene for again assisting this weekend to help with persons who are at Victoria Hospital. So I generally want to say it's a period for St. Lucia, and want to take this moment to remind our brothers and sisters to take the vaccine and to follow the protocols. Mr. Speaker, I rise to present this Consumer Protection Amendment Bill to this Honorable House. Mr. Speaker, the original Consumer Protection Act passed in this Honorable House in 2016, yet to date it still does not have a commencement date, and it is yet to be operationalized at the Ministry of Commerce. Mr. Speaker, from initial discussion of that bill, the act to present spans 24 years, Mr. Speaker. 24 years. I think it was started by our present Prime Minister and the member for Castries East. Mr. Speaker, I am glad that we are about to reach that finishing line and provide consumers and suppliers a fair and robust system for trade disputes. So, Mr. Speaker, because of the complex nature of this bill, I beg leave to take some time to explain these amendments by doing the following. Provide some background as to Consumer Protection Act and the amendments that we're having, to highlight some of the deficiencies in the current act, to outline the remedial measures contained in the amendments before us. But before I get into background, I want to say another set of thank yous. I want to thank the staff of the Ministry of Commerce, especially the Consumer Affairs Department, past and present. Persons like Titus Preville, Philip McLaurin, persons in the House today like Mrs. Harriet Herman, our PS Sophia Henry, for the significant work that we've done on this bill. I want to thank the staff of the Attorney General's office, past and present, persons like Philip Lacobinier, Kim St. Rose, who labored tirelessly on the first act, Ms. Gillian Vidal-Ju, I think, who's in the House with us today, and our own legal officer at the Ministry of Commerce, Dylan Norbert Inglis, and our Attorney General. I want to thank members of the National Consumers Association, in particular, Mr. Kingsley St. Hill, and I know somewhere, he's somewhere listening to this debate today. Inch. Mr. David Polius, Hubert James, Andrew Antoine, and many others for keeping that up and center. I want to thank the member, upset at the moment, for Beaufort South, the then Honorable Prime Minister, who had the foresight and wisdom when this act was being discussed to allow time for further discussion. I want to thank our past Minister for Commerce, the member for Elbers, also for his effort at working on this bill. I want to thank members of the Bar Association, Chamber of Commerce, and all who labored to bring us to this situation where we are now. Mr. Speaker, background. In April 1985, the UN General Assembly, through resolution, adopted UN guidelines for customer protection. These guidelines took into account the interests and needs of consumers in all member states, particularly in developing states, recognizing that consumers often face imbalances in economic terms, educational level, and bargaining power, and bearing in mind that consumers should have the right of access to non-hazardous products, as well as the right to promote just, equitable, economic, and social development and environmental protection. These guidelines for consumer protection have the following objectives, Mr. Speaker: to assist countries in achieving or maintaining adequate protection for their population as consumers, to facilitate production and distribution patterns responsive to the needs and desires of consumers, to encourage high levels of ethical conduct for those engaged in the production and distribution of goods and services to consumers, to assist countries in curbing abusive business practices which adversely affect consumers, to facilitate the development of independent consumer groups, to further internationalize cooperation in the field of consumer protection, to encourage the development of market conditions which provide consumers with greater choice at lower prices. In addition, the UN guidelines also promote sustainable consumption. Mr. Speaker, recognizing the failure of the previous administration to make good on our international obligation, the St. Lucia Labour Party administration, first in 1997, commenced the process for the enactment of the domestic consumer protection legislation in St. Lucia. after approximately 3 years of development, in the year 2000, national consultation on the Consumer Protection Bill started. Stakeholder consultation on the draft bill continued for 15 years, spanning both administrations. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2015, I had the good fortune to present the Consumer Protection Bill before Parliament. The Consumer Protection Act was enacted in 2016 as number 9 of 2016. With the passing of the Act in January 2016, Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia became the first OECS state to pass such legislation. Mr. Speaker, the intention of the Act is to provide St. Lucian consumers with a mechanism to report and receive redress for breaches by suppliers of goods and services in St. Lucia, rich or poor. Protection from negligence or unscrupulous behavior on part of suppliers, without the need for admittedly often expensive and time-consuming litigation. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the Consumer Protection Act has not given a commencement date, and as such, the entities created thereby, and more importantly, the rights afforded by it have not been realized by the consumers. Mr. Speaker, the bill did not have a commencement date in 2016 because the then Prime Minister and member for Beaufort South, his judgment felt it was necessary to enact the piece of legislation. But considering the various concerns expressed by various stakeholders, felt that we needed to give them an opportunity to meet and discuss the concerns subsequent to enactment. Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Labour Party, which saw it fit to commence the process of developing the Consumer Protection Bill, which did the tedious work to draft and enact that act, has had to take up the task of presenting the amendments to this Honorable House today upon our return to office. Mr. Speaker, one would have thought that the needs of the average St. Lucian for recourse created by this act, coupled with considerable pressure from the National Consumers Association and the relevant local and regional stakeholders who clamored for the act to be given a commencement date, would have spurred in the last administration sufficient resolve to make the necessary amendment. Nonetheless, in keeping with Labour's clear and unwavering intent to deliver a robust consumer protection regime in St. Lucia, it gives me great pride and pleasure to stand here at presentation of the required amendments to the Act. Mr. Speaker, some 24 years after the initial discussions to implement a regime to protect consumers in St. Lucia, we are ready to afford citizens the rights and opportunities which the Consumer Protection Act was unable to do in its original form. I will now speak to the deficiencies in the current Consumer Protection Act. First, the current Act fails to adequately address the functions of the Consumer Affairs Department in the process. Outside of indicating that the department shall receive complaints and investigate them, the Act provided little guidance on how the Consumer Affairs Department would participate in that process. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the current Act creates an overlap in the powers of investigation held by the board and the Consumer Affairs Department under Parts 1 and 2 of the Act. Accepting that the section which speaks to the power of the department to investigate is wanting, to say the least. That power is also held by the board, and that led to two things. A, confusion and either failure of either entity to duly investigate, or two, a duplication of efforts on any complaint. Thirdly, the Act vests the duties of investigation and deliberation in the board. This flies in the face of principles of natural justice and empowers the Board of Consumer Protection, upon receipt of a complaint, to go out and investigate, deliberate on, and issue a decision on the matter. Fourthly, there exist concerns that members of the entities forming part of the process may be called upon to consider intricate legal issues with wide-reaching ramifications. Mr. Speaker, only means of appeal in the process and final point of determination was to an appeals tribunal which benefited from a court-appointed attorney and not a court-appointed judicial officer. Mr. Speaker, my government has made the promise to put the people first. In keeping with this promise, we intend to look after the best interests of both the business community and the consumer, and align the policies and legislation of this country with the evolving global rights and best practices. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we must assist in the Act and mete out to the people of St. Lucia a mechanism which will eventually balance the interests of all parties, while finally falling in line with the recommendations of the UN on consumer rights. So now I go into the remedial measures, and I will point out the various sections in the amendments before us. Against this background, I am pleased to stand in this honorable House to look at the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill, which will streamline the administrative aspects and processes relating to consumer protection complaints, the resulting investigation and hearing. In order to adequately do so, Mr. Speaker, this bill essentially replaces the first three parts of the Consumer Protection Act number 9 of 2016. Part 1 of the bill addresses the Consumer Affairs Department. At Clause 6, the functions of the department are provided as receiving, investigating complaints, reporting, researching, and quite importantly, educating the public and promoting matters of consumer protection and consumer interests. In order to meet these functions, the department is adequately empowered by Clause 7 of the bill. Clause 14 specifically empowers the authorized officers to engage in acts required for the investigation of complaints. And Clause 17 requires that a report be prepared upon completion of the investigation. Mr. Speaker, in the interest of transparency, Clause 17 also mandates that the report be furnished on all parties: the complaining consumer, the responding supplier, and in Clause 18, a report is transmitted to the officiating counsel. It would be remiss of me not to indicate that this bill seeks to ensure that all of the actions of the officers pursuant to this bill are done with the appreciation of the civil rights and liberties of all persons involved. Mr. Speaker, relevant by way of a warrant shall be obtained in all required instances pursuant to Clause 15. Part 2 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, creates the council. At clause 21 of the bill, that council replaces the Consumer Protection Board as presented in the Act of 2016. Clause 22 provides for the composition of the council. Namely, you have representatives of the St. Lucia Bar Association, the St. Lucia Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture, the National Consumers Association, and other adequately skilled and experienced persons. Mr. Speaker, 25 shall consider reports and accept the new international thrust towards mediation and shall attempt to facilitate discourse and agreement through alternative dispute resolution processes. Mr. Speaker, we all know that not every consumer is without fault or always acting in good faith. For this reason, Clause 39 empowers the Council to reject a complaint it believes to be frivolous or vexatious or not in good faith. This clause also allows for the Council to reject a complaint that is made more than 6 months after the grounds that the complaint arose. This is to ensure that the regime remains fair to both the consumer and the plier. Mr. Speaker, Part 3 of the bill covers the Consumer Protection Tribunal. The tribunal is established at Clause 48, with its composition outlined in Clause 49. The tribunal boasts 3 members, 2 of whom hold expertise in industry, public administration, or consumer protection, and 1 of whom is an attorney of at least 10 years' experience, who is required to be present for a duly constituted meeting. Mr. Speaker, at Clause 60, parties are afforded the option to appeal to the civil commercial court if they are unhappy with the decision of the tribunal. I would want to take a moment and refer to at least 2 or 3 sections of the amended act, which I want to bring to the attention of, through you, Mr. Speaker, the public. On page 4, and that is under section 18, and I read, under clause 6 of the bill, a new section 45 is introduced in the act to provide for fixed penalties. And I would also want to go over on page 29 under section 45, and I read, the council shall give written notice to a person of his or her liability to pay a fixed penalty if the council believes that an offense specified under section 4 has been committed. And Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, I will take the moment to spell out the penalties as outlined in Schedule 4. Under Schedule 4 fixed penalties, loss or injury suffered by consumers due to defective goods sold or services provided, the penalty there is % of the value of the defective goods or services provided up to $10,000. 2. Another offense is failure to observe consumer rights, and the fixed penalty is $750. 3. Non-compliance with supplier's duties, again a fixed penalty of $750. Engagement in unfair trade practices, you have a fixed penalty of $1,000. Failure to observe consumer safety requirements, and the penalty there is $1,500. Non-compliance with recall of goods and services, the penalty is $2,000. And failure to observe the promotion provisions, we have a fixed penalty of $750. Speaker, I also want to bring to the attention of the public through you, Mr. Speaker, under Section 25, under Clause 13 of the bill, Schedule 2 and 3 of the Act are amended to place in logical sequence the consumer complaints form. Mr. Speaker, I will now go just to highlight some of the items included in that form. And that is on page 40 of the schedule before you, of the amendments. Consumer complaints form that the public, every person who has a complaint must fill in or get to the Department of Consumer Affairs, giving a verbal report, and somebody at the department will assist, if any, to fill out the form. The first section asks for information on the consumer, and that's general things about name, address, occupation, phone number, information on the business, information on the goods or services that the person purchased. Section 4, the technical information of product. On the 5, complaint in a court of law, and this is asking the person who made the complaint whether they have actually taken legal action in a court of law, or yes or no, and they would give that information. And on the Section 6, Mr. Speaker, the whole issue of redress. There, the person who is going to be asked the question of what form of redress would consider a satisfactory solution. And there, the person would outline whether they want a refund, an exchange, whether they want the item, whether they want a credit note, or something else. And Section 7 is going to ask the complainant whether he or she is willing to attend and testify at the proceedings. So, Mr. Speaker, these are some of the areas I want to highlight in the amendment bill. Mr. Speaker, the introduction of this framework in no way seeks to alter the rights afforded to citizens in the current Act, as it was appreciated that the rights and other relevant provisions were based on original models of legislation. Again, I say to you and to the people, Mr. Speaker, that this bill represents the honoring of a promise by the St. Lucia Labour Party to put people first. In doing so, we sought to ensure that their rights can be accessed via a sound and adequate structure, a structure which seeks to create a fair trading environment. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that the amendments read today will be historic, not just for having been presented in this honorable House, but for affording the suppliers an unbiased regime to adequately represent themselves, while finally granting every St. Lucian access to free and fair recourse from unfair business practices. In essence, this act will create an enabling environment within which both the consumer and the business community can function with a high level of certainty and confidence. Mr. Speaker, members, the Consumer Protection Act and the amendments has been a marathon, 24 years. But I am elated that we have reached the finishing line. The St. Lucia Labour Party continues to deliver and put the people of St. Lucia first. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would want to do a brief summary of this in Creole for the persons here today. Aujourd'hui, nous venons pour faire un arrangement pour un bill nous est passé en 2016. Et puis ça nous a fait à l'aise là, nous avons passé en loi pour tous ces gens qui ont acheté commission différents côtés. Si vous allez côté par exemple, et puis il y a des choses qui ne travaillent pas bien pour mener aller ministre commerce, consumer affairs section et puis pour ça assis avec vous pour regarder qui manière où ça taper bagaille ça. Moi j'ai replacé bagaille comme ça. Bon. Loi ça là, comme on dit, il y a 24 années depuis nous avons mis devant à sous livre la loi. Mais nous faisons ça en 2015 et même si nous te mettons à sous loi, nous te la patenie en date pour loi ça là commencer parce que à l'aise là nous te du bout en moment et puis tous ces gens business là et puis tous ces avocats viennent assises pour regarder et puis pour discuter pour qui ça nous a mettre en loi pour nous faire des affaires juste pour nous. Alors actuellement là ça nous a fait là nous avons regardé ça il y aura travail encore pour l'autre 5 ans. So à présent là tout le monde est d'accord et puis arrangement fait à présent. Aujourd'hui je suis content pour dire tous les gens sont ici. Nous, aujourd'hui, avons essayé de finir un voyage qui était très long, 24 années. Et puis aujourd'hui, nous avons essayé de faire loi sur l'eau acheter un bagage et puis un bagage pas qu'à travailler. Là, il y a une loi pour protéger vous, vous acheter là. Aussi, en même loi, ça là. Nous avons protégé les gens business pour les gens qui ne peuvent pas venir accuser les gens à différentes manières. Là aussi, on dit la même chose ça pour protéger le business. So, Mr. Speaker, members, I present this amended bill for your consideration. I thank you.
Honourable members, the question is that the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill be read a second time. The member for Swazella Saltibus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will not be long at all because long overdue, and one that every single St. Lucian will benefit from, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to echo the member for Soufrière François Jacques in her words of thanks to various people and entities. I noted you did not mention, Minister, a gentleman by the name of Guillaume Simon, who was extremely involved in this bill as well, and who was one of the people when I came into office in 2016 who brought to my attention some of the matters outstanding and matters to go forward with. But Mr. Speaker, what I would like to speak to is that recognizing the importance of this bill was one of the things that I did, and to try to get it through every year, particularly trying to get it through on World Consumer Awareness Day or World Consumer Protection Day. I think that's the correct title of it. But for one reason or the other, Mr. Speaker, there were the normal bureaucratic delays from various agencies. I know that one of the things that held us back as well, Mr. Speaker, was some of the concerns from the Bar Association. So this bill has gone full circle because the member for Soufrière presented it first in 2015, and she is now bringing it and giving it a date, Mr. Speaker. However, I was very happy with everything she said, Mr. Speaker, but apart from the fact somebody listening on the outside would get the impression, based on some of the language she used, that the former government did not, while we worked, but did not do anything in terms of the actual amendments that were brought to our attention as relates to the various associations and entities out there. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to correct that, and I am not looking for any praise at all under this bill, because the most significant aspect of it was done by the minister, and I, as somebody who has worked with the minister in a previous life, I can vouch for her being extremely meticulous in what she does, and I know that the extent of this bill in its original state was a lot of work. So I applaud her for that, but I was just concerned with the statement to the impression that what is being presented today was something that had to start back from where she left it. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to turn your attention to the actual bill that everybody has, and you would notice that it was received by the Parliament Office on May 31st, 2020, election being in July 26, 2020. But, Mr. Speaker, I just want to now that truly today consumer is king, based on the fact that this bill is being passed, because for too long I'm aware of people who have suffered, and if you don't have the ability to pay an expensive lawyer, sometimes you don't get the justice. So now that this bill is passed, it gives the man or lady, woman at the bottom of the income ladder a position now to, truly get, some sort of representation. So I'm happy the bill is presented, and I support. Thank you.
Member for Castries East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just want to add my words of support to this amendment, Mr. Speaker. And as both speakers before me have alluded, this amendment started a long time ago. I think it's 1998 or 1998, 97, yeah. And at that time, I remember as Minister of Commerce, we started speaking about the Consumer Protection Bill, and there was a lot of fear and issues relating to it as far as the business people were concerned, the business sector. They thought that the bill was skewed against them, and there was quite a lot of debate and consultation and back and forth. I think there was some consultancy. The consumer protection bill was a matter that created a lot of disquiet at the time. And we've grown, we've developed, Mr. Speaker, and then came again in 2016. And then thought there was need for consultation. This time, I think the issue was with the Bar Association. And I'm glad that we've consulted with the Bar Association, and we have a bill that's acceptable to everyone, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to reiterate the emphasis of this government on putting people first. If you look at our history, and now our history, albeit in this cabinet of national unity, we have systematically gone about seeing about people, Mr. Speaker. Our first pronouncement, facility fees for people, we've done that. Our second pronouncement, helping people get children to school, we've done that. Our third, Mr. Speaker, expunging the records for people with minor offenses, COVID. And talking about COVID, Mr. Speaker, I do want you to, if with your leave, Mr. Speaker, to implore the people of St. Lucia to follow the COVID protocols. The Minister of Health has made it clear. This is not the time for political grandstanding, Mr. Speaker. And I want to make it clear. When we were in the opposition, we never for one moment, never. And the records are clear. Because these days, people say whatever they want, even forgetting the records. When we spoke about COVID when we were in opposition, there was no Delta variant. What we said at this time, we always said to people, obey the protocols. We always said it in this speaker. We always said, obey the protocols. We, as a political party, we refuse to have public gatherings because of these protocols. When we won the election in July, we did not hold our thank you rally, our thank you motorcade, because of protocols and COVID, Mr. Speaker. So when I read, particularly from people, and I'm coming back to the consumer, talking about consumer protection, Mr. Speaker, protecting the consumer against COVID. Consumer against COVID, Mr. Speaker. So when I read, Mr. Speaker, from people who refuse to understand that they have lost the elections, they refuse to understand it. They refuse to understand it, Mr. Speaker, that the transition has taken place and there is a new government. And we didn't put ourselves in power, Mr. Speaker. The people put us here. The people of St. Lucia had their choice and they put us in power to work with them, Mr. Speaker. So when I see these things about trying to tie COVID with politics and trying to say you said this and you said that and dealing with almost trying to celebrate the fact that there is a fourth wave, Mr. Speaker, it's hurtful. It's really hurtful because the fourth, any of us here, Mr. Speaker, can contract COVID. Any of us. So don't try to make political points because the figures, the numbers are surging now, Mr. Speaker. It's unfair. And then there's something called retribution. And what you look for, Mr. Speaker, careful what you ask for. Because when you lie and you malign, Mr. Speaker, it comes back to hit you, Mr. Speaker. So this bill is just a continuation of our philosophy of putting people first, Mr. Speaker. And that one, in particular, gives people the opportunity to register their complaints and their dissatisfaction when they purchase any goods or services that is not to the best standard, Mr. Speaker. And that reminds me also of the Bureau of Standards, which I'm sure will work together, will be able to help in the Consumer Protection Act, Mr. Speaker. And again, the Bureau of Standards was expanded when we were in government and I was Minister for Commerce. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a very pleasant feeling to be in this Parliament passing these people-centered legislation. I want to commend the Minister of Commerce and the former Minister of Commerce, Mr. Speaker. I know he had the will, but I've spoken to him privately about there's need for a little more than will, Mr. Speaker. There's the need for association. So even if you have the best of will, but your association is bad, the will not get you anywhere. Yeah, so Mr. Speaker, the member for Choiseul was involved in that. And I'm sure he had the will. He wanted to bring there. He wanted to bring there. I'm sure he wanted to bring there, Mr. Speaker. But the forces were against him. The forces, and he won't admit it, because I understand. But the forces were, because you see, Mr. Speaker, there's a basic philosophical difference between the Labour Party and the party he stands for. Basic. Our philosophy is based on people. Our philosophy is based on ensuring that there is meritocracy. Our philosophy is based on ensuring that education is the key. And look at our history. Universal secondary school education, computers in schools, and now we're going for universal childhood education, Mr. Speaker. So this consumer bill, this consumer amendment is just another of our people-centered legislation, Mr. Speaker. So I am happy to be associated with its final passage, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that there can be no abuse, because we can't abuse the system. We should not abuse the system, Mr. Speaker. There should not be any abuse, and people should use many times people do not acquaint themselves with what's available to them. And I'm sure the Ministry of Commerce will further educate the general public on the provisions of the Consumer Protection Amendment Act and the Consumer Protection Act generally, where the public can be educated, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, with these few words, I want to congratulate everyone, and I want to tell the people of St. Lucia that this government continues in the track of putting people first. There will be a number of people-centered legislation that will come to this honorable house. In spite of the economic peril that we find ourselves, find ways and means of assisting the people of St. Lucia. The people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. And that is what we are about. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your indulgence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Castries Southeast.
Just a brief contribution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, on the substantive part, and that's in consultation with the member who presented the bill. I made my observation as go through the bill, and I know consumer is such a vast area, and I did ask whether services also included construction. And understanding that government is the largest consumer of construction services, and recognizing the kind of abuse that government goes through, especially as we review some of the sub-projects that has been implemented in recent times, cost overruns. And I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that on one sub-project where being implemented in Bexar at a cost of approximately $9.6 million, there is cost overruns already of $385,000, and the people of St. Lucia in this regard are the consumers. And I could speak of another project where the consumers is the government of St. Lucia. So the Consumer Protection Bill at this stage is not only looking at consumers in the perspective of persons going to courts, but also says construction is indeed a major service that consumers actually procure. And therefore, I think looking down the road, we would have to consider provision in the consumer protection to protect government from the abuse of contractors, and vice versa, persons who also procure construction services, who build their homes. And Mr. Speaker, you want to take this very seriously, that persons sometimes go to the bank, they get a loan, hire a contractor to build their homes for them. And the experience is not good. And sometimes they have no recourse. The Consumer Protection Bill will be moving in such direction as we continue to look at areas to improve. Because like the member who presented the bill have highlighted, and of course when we speak of consumer, the focus and tendency seems on the products we buy at courts and the standing fund, but the area of abuse, people of St. Lucia, the government, is one of construction services, consultancy services, and I would be happy to see a bill like that also address those areas, because it certainly will bring back a whole lot more for us to reflect on. I thank you for this brief contribution.
The Ministry Southeast may want to look at Section 3, C, Roman numeral 2. That may answer your question. Minister for Commerce. My apologies, Minister for Library.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I rise to make my brief contribution to the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill, I am proud to be associated with the St. Lucia Labour Party, the party of Sir George F.L. Charles, our party of bread, justice, and freedom. I say so, Mr. Speaker, because every progressive piece of legislation passed to benefit the people of this country or to put people first have either been championed by the Labour Party in opposition or passed by the SLP in government. Mr. Speaker, the Consumer Protection Act is a very important piece of legislation which was passed by the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party in 2015 as indicated by the Minister for Commerce. The Act provides for, inter alia, the terms of consumer agreement, consumer rights, duties of suppliers, unfair practices, consumer safety, recall of goods, products, of liability, receipt and investigation of complaints, and appeals tribunal. The amendment to this Act includes provisions for strengthening the Consumer Protection Act. I will, Mr. Speaker, briefly highlight major changes highlighted in the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill. First of all, Mr. Speaker, the Amendment Bill recognizes the Department of Consumer Affairs as a new Part 1 of the Act. It specifically provides for the functions and the powers of the department. I note, Mr. Speaker, that functions include educating the public through the dissemination of information relating to consumer affairs and promoting and protecting the welfare and interests of consumers. I believe that these functions are of paramount importance, Mr. Speaker, as it is extremely important for consumers to know and understand their rights as a consumer and to ensure that everything is done by the department in protecting the welfare of consumers. It also outlines the procedures for making a complaint to the department, but importantly, does not preclude the consumer from seeking redress through the court system. It is to be noted that the person is protected against any losses incurred by the supplier once the complaint is made in good faith, reasonably believing that the allegations made in it are substantially true, and in the circumstances, it is reasonable for the person to make the complaint. The amendment bill also provides for the process of investigating complaints by the department. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the provisions for inspection are very comprehensive, and it appears that no stone has been left unturned. I now come to the major amendment to the Act, which is the establishment of the Consumer Protection Council. The functions of the council are outlined, and I wish to highlight them, Mr. Speaker. A, considering and investigating an investigation report and supporting documents submitted under Section 17. B, facilitating through an alternative dispute resolution proceedings the resolution of a dispute between a consumer and a supplier in relation to goods and services. Preparing a binding written agreement if the parties to the dispute resolution proceedings have reached an amicable solution under Section 43A. And there is Section D and E, Mr. Speaker. This new body will play an important role, namely that of alternative dispute resolution proceedings in the resolution of a dispute between the consumer and the supplier. This will definitely help, Mr. Speaker, in fast-tracking the settlement of a dispute and obviate the need for the matter to be brought before the courts. I think this is a very important addition to the Consumer Protection Act, Mr. Speaker. The amendment bill also provides for the establishment of another new body called the Consumer Protection Tribunal. And of course, the functions of the tribunal are listed, including ratifying a binding written agreement transmitted to it by the Consumer Protection Council under Section 46(1)(a) by signing the written agreement. Mr. Speaker, there is Section B and C, and I conclude by simply indicating, Mr. Speaker, the recognition of the Consumer Affairs Department and the establishment of the two new bodies, namely the Consumer Protection Council and the Consumer Protection Tribunal, will contribute to improving the manner in which consumer protection issues are dealt with, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, I give my full support to this amendment bill. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister for Commerce.
Mr. Speaker, I propose that we move forward with the other sections of the bill at this point. That the bill be read a third time?
No, not as
No,
yet.
that it move into committee stages?
No, we're going to committee stages. Honorable members, the question is that the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Consumer Protection Act, Cap 13.24.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 2.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Yes.
I would like an amendment on the...
Let me just say to members that I do give a little time before I say part of the bill, and members should alert themselves to that time. It seems a little unfortunate that after I've said the clause forms part of the bill, that we have to revert to something that I've given some time to consider. So please be alert with your amendments. But go ahead, Minister.
Clause 3.2, Mr. Speaker. That's clause 3A. I would like to replace the clause authorized officer with a new wording, Mr. Speaker. And the wording is, authorized officer has a meaning assigned under the Distribution of Goods Act 13.09.
So can you just repeat that?
I can repeat it?
Yes.
Authorized officer has the meaning assigned under the Distribution and Prices Act, Cap 13.09.
The proposed amendment under Section 2 of the Principal Act, Section 3, here, that after authorized officer, the words complaints and investigation officer or assistant be deleted and replaced by has the meaning assigned under. clear?
Yeah.
So clause 3 as amended stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Amendment of section 4.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Substitution of part 1.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Clause 6.
Substitution 2.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill. Clause 7.
Substitution of part 3.
Clause 7 stands part of the bill. Clause 8.
Amendment of section 62.
Clause 8 stands part of the bill. Clause 9.
Amendment part 6.
Clause 9 stands part of the bill. Clause 10.
Amendment of section 126.
Clause 10 stands part of the bill. Clause 11.
Amendment of part 9.
Clause 11 stands part of the bill. Clause 12.
Amendment of part 12.
Clause 12 stands part of the bill. Clause 13.
Substitution of schedules 2, 3, and 4.
Clause 13 stands part of the bill. Clause 14.
Insertion of new schedule 5.
Mr. Speaker, we have an amendment for clause.
You want to amend clause
Yes.
14?
On the clause from the second line, where we have 13.1.
What section is that?
Second line.
No,
of
what section?
Section 14.
14, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Where we have 13.1E, should be 13.3E.
That the amendment is on the section 14. Second line should be on the section 13 subsection 3E and not 1.
Aye.
Clause 1.
Short title.
The bill. Honourable members, the question of the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, you stop at clause 14.
We completed.
What's that? No. No, there's a clause 17.
No, no. You are mistaking clauses and
we're
sections.
the sections. Okay. So
Which is why when you said,
section 2.
which is why when you referred to section 14, when you refer to clause 14, I ask you which section. But like, for example, clause 14 may well be sections 15 to 61.
Okay.
You wish to make,
I'm with you then.
section 17.2, what clause would that be, Madam Clerk? Just a minute, Sir. Section 17.2 at page 20. (17.2) But 17.2 is not on page 18. Not the one I have. Okay. Well, let's doesn't matter. It is 17.2 you want to discuss. Investigation report. What is the
14 days. Within 14 days. That's a 10 period. The director shall, within 14 days after review.
Okay. So the proposed amendment 17.2
Yes.
is the director shall
Within
after
14
within
days.
within 14
Within 14 days, yes.
After review.
within 14 days after review. That deal with what you want to say, it doesn't give a time for review.
After 14 days. After 14 days.
No, it said after 14 days after review. But what if the review, what if they start the review in 31 days? No, you're saying 14 days after review. But what if the review begins on the 41st day? After receiving the report, what if the director begins the review on the 41st day after it? Then it means they will provide the report on the 45th day. I don't think that's what you want to say.
No, 14 days.
You want to say 14 days after receipt?
After receipt.
Okay. So the director shall, within 14 days following receipt.
Yeah.
Okay. So the proposed amendment is that the shall, within 14 days following receipt, after review and investigation. So we go back to what clause is it, Madam Clerk?
17.
No, that's section 40. Oh, that's not a clause. What clause does it fall under?
Okay, section 22. Section 22 falls under clause 6. Clause 6. Clause 6 of the bill.
Yeah.
Section 22.
Okay. This part where?
Clause 6. Section 22. The thing doesn't have clauses here. The clause is not properly. It's in the file.
Stands part of the bill as amended. Okay.
Section 22.
So, honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question: as many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. You need another amendment?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
You keep making the error of referring to a clause as a section. These are two different things. A clause encompasses several sections because of the way the bill is written.
I think it's the format.
Yes. In fact, the clerk was just bringing.
That's the format. Right. The remit is wrong. Okay. Composition of the council.
Yes.
Council. Instead of 5, 7 members.
So section 22, the proposed amendment is that the council shall consist of 7, not 5. So section 22.
And C.
Second C, 2 persons.
Nominated by 2 persons. By the National Council.
Not 1 person, 2.
2, yeah. And 3 by the minister.
So 2 and 3. Okay, so that's it for that section?
Yes.
So section 21,
20.
1, amended from 5
20.
to 7.
22.
22, 1, sorry.
Yes.
From 5 to 7.
Yes.
Subsection C, from 1 to 2 individuals.
Yes.
And D to 3 persons.
Yeah. That is
Section 21 as amended stands part of the bill.
22.
Why do I keep saying 21? Section 22 as amended stands part of the bill. Okay. For the third time now, I now put the question. The question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many opinions say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill went through committee stages with amendments. Honorable Minister of Commerce.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. And up the question, as many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Consumer Protection Amendment Act 2021.
Mr. Leader of Government Business.
Speaker, I move that the House be adjourned, sign or die.
Honorable members, the question is that this House stand adjourned, sign or die. I now put the question, as many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting adjourned.
We've come to the end of the sitting of the House of Assembly. We saw the debating of 2 bills, which include the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill and the Drugs Prevention and Misuse Amendment Bill. Both bills went through committee stages with amendments and were read a third time and passed. Thank you once again for joining the broadcast, and please join us on Thursday, 16 September 2021, where we will have the sitting of Senate at 10 a.m. On behalf of the Government Information Service, do have a wonderful day.